2015 matric results are out, and now there are a number of figures that we may or may not understand. But what we do know is that the pass rate has dropped from last year. Now, I'm joined in studio by Dr. Nick Spall, who is an education economist, to help us make sense a little bit about these figures that we heard yesterday. Nick, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Right, so let's just get into it. So we do know that our matric pass rate is at 70.7% this year, which is a decline from last year. Could you explain to us, is this something that we should be concerned about?
Yeah. So last year's pass rate was 76%, and the drop this year, as you mentioned, is now down to 71%. So it's a 5 percentage point drop. It is quite a big drop. A lot of people have said, this is an indication that the standards are declining, more students are failing. But the important thing to draw a distinction between is the percentage of learners that are passing and failing versus the number of students that are passing and failing. Because what you had was last year we had about 530,000 learners that were writing matric, whereas this year that figure's gone up to about 670,000. So you've got an extra 130,000 odd students that are in the system and writing matric. So even though there was a decline in the percentage of students that are passing, in terms of the numbers of students that are passing, that's actually gone up. So we've got 40,000 more learners that are passing matric. You've got 15,000 more learners that are getting bachelor passes, 3,500 more distinctions in key subjects. All of these things are really good things. So we really need to take cognizance of the fact that even though the pass rate's declining, the absolute numbers of students that are getting passes and bachelor passes is actually going up, which is a good thing.
Absolutely. Now, we did hear, this buzzword of progress learners this year, and I was wondering, could you explain that to us and why it was introduced this year?
Yes. So the policy it's called the progression policy, says that you can only fail once per phase. So in South African education system, we have these phases that are split into 3-year chunks, grade 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So this is the first year, or last year and this year, the first year that these progressed learners are reaching matric. So learners that had previously failed multiple times and then dropped out, now only fail once and then remain in the system. So students that would otherwise be sitting at home or unemployed are now writing matric. Now, these students are weaker learners, as I'm sure you would imagine.
Absolutely.
Now, the department has said that there were only 66,000 progressed learners this year. But if you look at the figures, there's actually an extra 130,000, so twice as many learners as that. And the only explanation for those additional learners is that they were either progressed or they were pushed into matric. So this is a really, I think it's something that's worth exploring further, is what does this mean for the matric exam? What does it mean for the standardization process with Umulusi? I think these are all really important points to talk about and to ask the hard questions.
All right. Now, you bring up Umulusi, and I was wondering, do you think that the standardization process has faults in it? And what do you think about that process?
So Umulusi plays an extremely important role in the South African education system. They quality assure these matric exams. They give the public peace of mind that what's going on is actually there's some underlying process that is independent of the department in terms of the pass rates and bachelor passes and the quality of the exams. The problem is that standardization process, when Umulusi adjusts the marks, either increasing the marks or decreasing the marks to try and make them comparable year on year,
Sure.
is quite an opaque process. It's not at all transparent in terms of what's going on. So, for example, this year, some subjects went up. I think it was about 13 subjects that got pushed, the marks got pushed up. 10 subjects, the marks got pushed down. We don't know how much those marks, did it go up by 10%, 20%, 30%? Did it go down by 1% in sub-subjects? They don't say. Now, that standardization process, if I try to explain it, it's basically comparing a distribution, last year's distribution, the 550,000 kids that wrote matric, to this year's distribution to try and say, these are actually similar distributions. We need to shift them to make sure that it's the same kind of difficulty of the exam. That's what that shifting process is meant to do.
All right.
But you've got this underlying flaw of we've got these extra 130,000 kids in the system. So the distribution this year is actually fundamentally weaker than the distribution last year. So you cannot just shift that distribution up and shift the marks up in these key subjects.
Yeah.
So to be honest, I am a little bit concerned about what happened in that process. And whether or not there are things which, if the public knew about, they would actually be very concerned. So I think these are questions which we need to be asking Umulusi and asking the department. They referred to the fact that these 66,000 learners only accounted for a drop of 3.5 percentage points in the pass rate.
Sure.
And we know it dropped by 5 percentage points. And so they say this means that the papers were actually harder this year.
Right, yes.
I think that it's possible that these progressed learners, the full 130,000, actually account for the full drop, in which case Umulusi shouldn't have adjusted those marks upward, and the matric pass rate would actually be lower than what we see today, that 71%.